We are on part 7 of my guided reading series, which is a small group or one-on-one reading. We've covered what to do before the lesson to prepare it, and so far 2 parts of what to do during the lesson, the pre-reading part of it and also the reading part of it. Today we're going to look at the after reading part of it, and that is the comprehension component. Comprehension is oftentimes seen as secondary to reading, but in actuality it's just as important that the child can understand what they're reading as much as they can say the words that they're reading. After all, even adults have had times where we've had text in front of us, we can say every word of it, but it doesn't actually make sense to us. Being a reader is not just saying the words, but making sense of what the words mean. In the beginning, I talked about having a comprehension ball in your kit, and I said that it's not the best way of doing it, but it is one way. The actual best way of doing comprehension is to have some ideas beforehand of what you want your child to receive from that book comprehension-wise. Pick books that are good for that strategy. And then when you do that picture walk and the prep stuff before reading, you're mentioning the comprehension strategies, and that focus point that we talked about also could be used as a tool to help with that strategy with the comprehension. And at the very end of the story, making sure that the questions you're asking match with the comprehension that you're hoping the student or child gets from that book. As always, it's important that you're documenting how your child or student or students are doing with the comprehension part of it. So on that same paper that you've been documenting how they're reading the words and everything you want them to learn from it and all those notes that you've been taking, make sure you're also writing down how they're doing with the comprehension questions. And if you really want to do a good job, you'll actually have the questions written down ahead of time that you want them answering. So I'm going to use the Texas Standards for Students, or called TEKS, to tell you a list of some various comprehension strategies that students are supposed to do. Once again, I'm not going to attach a grade level to a certain strategy, and the reason being that it has more to do with child growing and developing than it is about a particular grade level, in my opinion. However, if you want to look up the grade level or get more information about them or even figure out what they mean, then you can always Google the phrase TEKS language arts, and it'll pull up everything I'm saying to you. If you're from another state and happen to come across this video, you can Google your state name, and school standards or education standards typically will pop up with your state standards. It's very similar to our TEKS. Here we go. 1. Establish and evaluate author's purpose. 2. Come up with questions. 3. Make and confirm predictions. 4. Making connections to personal experiences, other texts, and the world. 5. Evaluate details for importance. 6. Synthesize information for new understandings. 7. Retell, paraphrase, and summarize texts. 8. Reusing vocabulary. 9. Discuss topics and themes. 10. Identify and describe main character, internal and external traits. 11. Describe the elements of plot development. 12. Describe the setting. 13. Recognize characteristics of informational text. 14. Recognize characteristics of persuasive text. 15. Make inferences. 16. Discuss rhyme, rhythm, repetition, alliteration, visual patterns, and structures in poems. 17. Demonstrate knowledge of characteristics of folktales, fairytales, legends, and myths. 18. Identify first or third person in text. 19. Identify and explain the use of repetition. 20. Explain the relationships amongst characters. 21. Explain the influence or setting on the plot. I know that was a lot. Keep in mind I did take from kindergarten to 5th grade and smush it down, so there's a lot to unfold there for each individual grade level. So keep in mind that if that list is overwhelming you, that you can look up your child's grade level the way I described before to help you kind of figure out where you want to focus your child's learning. Also, I'll I'll take a moment now to kind of simplify things a bit for you to help you with all this. For younger students, especially at the beginning of the year, the focus should really be on retelling and connecting. Those two things are the building blocks for everything else I mentioned. Also remember that as your child grows and their reading level becomes higher and the text becomes more complex, some of the things that I talked about, like setting and plot, which is the problem solution in the story, will actually come easier because the stories will be developed around those ideas. Also, I kind of talked about this before, but the easiest thing you can do for yourself is to find books that match with the comprehension strategy you want to cover, not think of comprehension strategy and try to make a book work for it. So for example, if you really want your child to get settings, you don't want to grab any old book. You want to grab books that have a really strong setting. For example, it's not a book, but Star Wars, space, the time was a long time ago. All these things are really important to telling that story. Now that you know some of the ins and outs of guided reading, I'm going to do one more video where I'm going to go over analyzing what you're doing with it, analyzing how your child is doing with it, tips and tricks to help you get better with it, and how to stay organized with it. So basically a video that's going to kind of summarize everything, but also give you some next steps.